Welcome to the world of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me as I dive into another episode where we talk about the history and lore and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and the game of Avowed. For those of you who might be new, all of those games share the same world known as Eora. And so this podcast dives into all of those things just so we can appreciate the writing and the development that Obsidian has put into those games and explore the world that is Eora. If you're new to this show, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here. If you've been coming to this show for a long time and you haven't heard episodes every week like normal, again, sorry for the lack of episodes that I've recently had. I've just been adjusting to my new schedule with my new job, and I thank you for your patience and the support that a lot of you have sent through emails and stuff like that. I'm recording this in the morning, so I don't know if that makes my voice sound a little different. It sounds different to me, but whatever. We're going to dive into it today. Today's episode might be a little bit spoilery for you if you are not finished the game of Avowed, although by now the game has been out for more than 2 months. I suspect that a lot of you have pretty much gotten to the end. So there's a lot of stuff that I want to cover that isn't at the end of the game, but today I was perusing Avowed stuff and thinking about like episodes I can do for next week. And I found myself thinking about the topic of mage folk, which is something I've covered before, or I guess mag folk. I've always said mage folk, so I'm probably going to just continue using that, even though I think in the game of Avowed they say mag folk whenever it comes up, MAEGFOLC. I've done an episode on them before, so if you're interested in checking it out, go ahead and check that one out. But today we're going to go a little bit more in depth and talking about a specific kind of mag folk. And yeah, but it does relate to some spoilers within the game of Avowed. I'm not going to say how, because that would probably relate to spoilers. But I can't talk about mag folk in Avowed without talking about some of the endgame stuff in Avowed. Now, it's not, I don't think, mainline narrative spoiler. Like, this isn't something that you necessarily have to learn, but you will learn it, and it'll be something that kind of comes up closer to the end of the game and how it's related. So if you in any way listening to this, you're like, I don't want to learn something that comes at the end of the game and it's a really cool thing and all that. If you think that would be a spoiler for you, then maybe jump off. It can be connected to the main narrative. I'm trying to be purposely vague so as to like minimize any chance of like spoiling anything for you, because it's like tangentially related at the least. But regardless, for those of you who know what's going on, then you might understand why I'm trying to skirt around it a little bit. So let's just stop this opening segment and dive straight into today's lore.
Half the locals would arrest you for trespassing and the rest would kill you outright. I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So in order to even talk about what we're talking about today, let's first go over what mag folk or mage folk even are. And I'm going to keep this as brief as I can because there's a decent amount to actually go through today. Mage folk, as described on pillarsofeternity.fandom.com, they are large humanoid beings in Eora. Unlike natural creatures or kith-created beings, they are created by the gods themselves, typically to fulfill a purpose. Some mage folk are solely purpose-driven and act only in direct command of their god, while others act autonomously with some form of sentience. So that's a pretty broad description. Basically, the thing that make mag folk really interesting is that it says here they're not naturally created, which is to say that they haven't arrived out of they haven't become into existence through like evolution or from parentage or something like that. They weren't created organically. And it also says kith created. Kith, K-I-T-H, that's the word that designates the sentient species of Eora, or at least the civilized races of the sentient species of Eora. So, like elves, dwarves, humans, Orlans, Amauans, and godlikes, those are the kith species that make up the civilized races that you find throughout Eora, so, the kith of the world. And there are creatures and things that have been created by the kith, specifically through the science of animancy, which is the science of the stuff souls are made of, which is essence. But then you have things that the gods have created directly, and they have created them for a purpose. They have no parentage, they have no organic source. They were just created and formed by one of the gods of Eora for a purpose, and by a purpose, for such a time as this. And so that's what sets magfolk apart from any normal creature, is that they're created by the gods with this specific purpose in mind, and they are given a level of sentience, they're given a level of autonomy, depending on what the god who created them wanted them to be for, and they're typically tethered towards a pillar of Adra, that that's the theory being that that's where they get their energy or their source from, or at least if they're far enough away from the god, they start to have these like negative side effects from not being connected to the deity from which they originate. So that's the thing about magfolk. Now, what we're going to be talking about today, we see at the end of the game of Avowed in a region called the Garden, which is, the end game region for the game. And there are these documents that you can pick up called Magfolk Orison or Orison. I don't actually know what that word means. I'm just going to look it up real quick. Okay, cool. So I looked it up. Magfolk Orison. And the word orison just means a prayer. And that is actually very, I think, on point for what it is we're reading. So as you go through the garden, you're able to pick up Magfolk Orison documents 1 through 8. There are 8 of these that you can find throughout the garden. I'll be honest, in my first playthrough, I did miss a couple of them, so I had to kind of go back and hunt them down. And I've gone through the internet to try to just collect them into a series of images, because I'm going to be honest, that's just a lot easier when you're just trying to collect these things. And these are written from the perspective of the magfolk that you learn about in the game of Avowed. So as you're playing through Avowed, you will learn about the existence of magfolk within the Living Lands history, and they do have something to do with the mainline narrative. And this is where the spoilers are going to start to come in. So if you somehow weren't sure about jumping off, now is kind of like the train is leaving the station. The spoiler train is leaving the station. Why have I never done that before? I can feel like that's very on brand for me, for people who know me personally, but whatever. Anyways, so this is where we're going to start getting into that. The goddess Woodica, one of the 11 gods of the world of Eora, she created these magfolk, which she sent to the Living Lands, essentially to destroy the godless, or the Akida, as they probably would have called themselves, and more importantly, I believe, to imprison the deity that exists in the Living Lands, which you learn as you play the game. That's Sapadal. And so Woodica, the goddess of vengeance and rightful rulership and law, etc., she's sending these magfolk that she's created to the Living Lands to destroy the people and imprison the god. And so that is their purpose for which she has created them. And after they kind of complete their mission, they write these documents about what they're going through. And I'm not going to I'm not going to editorialize that right here, right now. I think it's better to just read these documents and we kind of experience what it is they're going through now. And I think we can also learn a little bit more about Mag. Now, before diving into the first one, I want to point out that, and this is something I've touched on in the lore before, in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, I read lore about how in the Living Lands there was apparently this magfolk city that, reaches up into the sky, etc., etc. And I had always wondered why the magfolk would make a city in the first place and what they're doing there. And I think some of this could possibly allude to that, because it does dive into some of these things. So let's read the first Magfolk Orison, which is a prayer. So I'm glad I learned a new word today. Magfolk Orison 1. Life is a prayer. God function defines the good prayer, and we pray it with our hearty holy genocide. Now says God function, destroy the insisted ones, puncture the cyst of their secessionist Adra, smother their children, for they are without soul, slaughter their livestock, for they are without soul, turn them out from their dwellings and make a census of them to pray to God function so that God will know the extirpation of the insisted ones is complete. Of them, Abaddon says, nothing can be made of that which is hoarded, so punish the hoarder. Of them, Bareth says, they are not upon the wheel, so they do not live nor die. They are as inert as stone. Of them, Aethys says, there is no hope for them, as they are enthralled by the hopeless, so deliver hope unto them. Of them, Galawain says, hunt them down even to the last child, as the predator hunts even unto the prey nest. Of them, Haliah says, among them are neither chick nor child is born with soul. There is no birth among them. Go make a bloody birth of them. Of them, Magrin says, make war on them. Of them, Andra says, strike away all memory, as the tide strikes the shape from the sand. Of them, Remergun howls. Of them, Skane says, make an effigy of them, disfigure them until their effacement is complete. Of them, Wall says, all the strangeness of the alien among them shall be mine. There is no stranger thing in the world, and I shall have it for my own. Of them, Woodica says, make an oath of their utter annihilation. This is God function, which is the topmost cameral of our mind. So I find this first thing really interesting because it really sets the tone for how these magfolk think. Because again, they are a living creature or a construct of some sort. Like they clearly have a level of sentience, and I love the way that they talk. The opening line, "Life is a prayer," is a motif that I think is repeated a little bit more often, and they have some really interesting ways of talking. Like for example, they use the word God function. Now, I always thought God function when I first read this was just Woodica. But I think God function is kind of like their holy programming, if you will. Like it is their God function. So God function or our purpose is in the way that I might read that now. But I was kind of replacing that for the goddess Woodica, who created these magfolk in the first place. So they're saying that their God function, which is their purpose, is their purpose defines the good prayer, and we pray it with our hearty holy genocide. So prayer for them is not just like sitting down, hands clasped, eyes closed, and head bowed. It is their literal life. Like what they are doing with their life is a prayer. Life is a prayer. That's how this starts out. And so their God function, which is the purpose here, is to destroy what they call the encysted ones. And that's ENCYSTED, encysted. They have a cyst, And this ties in, I very much am convinced of, that to the fact that the living lands is isolated from the rest of the world in a very spiritual sense. The world of Eora runs on a cycle of reincarnation. And so you die, your soul leaves your body, it goes into a nearby pillar of Adra, which conducts soul essence, and the soul uses that Adra to travel to the afterlife, otherwise known as the beyond. And then it stays there for a while, and then it comes back through the Adra into our mundane world and enters into a new body. But the living lands, the Adra is disconnected from the rest of the Adra of the world. The running theory throughout the world is that all of the Adra within the world is connected, and that's why it can connect to the beyond, where the gods reside. But in the living lands, it's not connected altogether. It is isolated in its own closed system. And so the soul essence that is in the living lands, the people that are dying there, are kind of just recycling into their own network. And that's why I believe that Woodica has programmed, for lack of a better word, this notion that they are encysted ones, like they are cysts within this kind of spiritual sense. And so this written down prayer that one of these magfolks have created kind of outlines what they're supposed to do. They call it their hearty holy genocide. They're going to destroy the entire Ikeda and the god that they worship, which is Sapadal. And they recount all of the gods of Eora and what they say in particular about why this is a holy genocide, right? So like of them, Abidan, which is one of the gods of the world, says, nothing can be made of that which is hoarded, so punish the hoarder. Now, I'm interested to know, I don't actually know yet, whether or not this is something the other gods have actually said to the magfolk, or if this is something that Woodica has implanted in them, or if these magfolk are very familiar with scripture and theology of the other gods, that they are kind of like making these conclusions on their own. They're like, oh, well, we know the theology of Abidan, and we know Abidan would say this, right? So they go through all of the gods of Eora, ending off with Woodica, and interestingly enough, they go in alphabetical order, which I think just matches this kind of like programmatic or like almost like computerized or mechanical creature that they are, that they have this algorithm that they go through. They go right through in alphabetical order, ending with Woodica, which is, very appropriate. And each time when they get to one of these gods in this prayer, they justify what it is they are doing. I find Remergond howling of particular interest because Remergond is very much like, everything's going to die at the end, so it doesn't matter anyways. I'm going to win kind of a thing. But perhaps Remergond howls because there is a sense to like this closed loop system where, and these souls are just like feeding in the land more and more. And as things die that come to the land, it just feeds the life there more and more. It's almost have the opposite effect that Remergund would necessarily want for the ultimate unraveling of the world, but whatever. That's a different kind of lore. We're not here to talk about that today. So this first prayer really outlines what it is they think and feel about what it is they're doing and why they're here in the living lands in the first place. Magfolk Orison 2. This is the second of the 8 letters that you can read as you pick up in the garden, and it starts off the same. Life is a prayer. Of the insisted ones we made a holy slaughter. The young we smothered with our hands, of the oldest we made fires. We rendered them down into fuel to clear the insisted growth. From some we removed the hands, from others the feet, from others the features, all of which we gathered in heaps which drew the insisted wildlife to feed. Into these heaps we set poison. Of their severed heads we made pyramids, 10 heads to a side, and the count of heads in each pyramid was 385. Of these pyramids they were counted 7,107. We spared those who could run with vigor, so they would lead us to other dwellings of the insisted. We made it known that mercy could be purchased by tribute, so that the insisted would gather together their livestock, their wine and wealth, to present to us. The first 10 of these tributes we accepted, and gave mercy. Then after the 11th tribute we began to kill all those assembled. In this way we made them gather themselves to be taken census and killed. In this way we approach God through prayer. Wow, I forgot how dark some of these things got. Of the insistent ones, we made a holy slaughter. This is their God function. This is the purpose they're here for, is to slaughter these people. So I shouldn't be surprised that we're talking about this. But it does go into some pretty, not vivid detail, but enough detail that it makes me uncomfortable. Of course, I've gotten squeamish in my old life, especially after having a son. When I was younger, I never used to balk at this kind of thing, and now I do. So I don't know. I think it's just a part of growing up. But anyways, it's interesting to read for a couple of reasons. One, I think insisted ones refer to the godless, the Akita. I think it also could refer to, if they say insisted one or the insisted, might refer to the god Sapidol. I'm thinking there's an interchange between those particular words, because it talks here about the insisted growth, which I imagine is the actual land itself, or the nature of the land that is connected to Sapidol. Because as you play through Avowed, you do learn that Sapidol is the god of the living lands, and that her connection to living lands is very much through the nature. She can feel the plants and trees and animals, in a sense, and she hears their cries, etc., etc., right? So I think that the god, the growth, I guess you could say, might actually be the land itself. That's just me kind of speculating as we're reading along. One thing I thought was interesting, even though it has nothing to do with the lore, is just how much this reads because I've grown up and I live in a faith community, and so reading capital S scripture in my life is something I normally do, and I, like many, and I'm just coming from my own perspective, so I guess I can't know, for any of you that are listening, if you are in different faith backgrounds or not at all, this might sound different, but I know the one I come from, if you read the Old Testament kind of stuff, there are these things where they get very specific with numbers. I don't know why. It just made me think of that when it was of their severed heads we made pyramids, 10 heads to a side, and the count of heads in each pyramid was 385. Of the pyramids we counted 7,707. Et cetera, et cetera. And I know if you go into the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, they do actually have a census in there. There's a book called Numbers, and so they count livestock and people and all these things, and it gets very specific. And there's also a lot of symbolism behind numbers. I don't know. It just kind of set off the neurons in my head that are connected to that. So I thought that was I don't know if that was on purpose for whoever wrote that Obsidian. I don't know if he did that because it not pays homage but hints to it or something. I don't know. I liked it. I liked it anyway, so that's that. And in here, in the next half of the letter, getting back more to the lore, it talks about some of their strategy or tactic, if you will, letting the people who are strong run away, so that way they can follow them to more people, and then letting people give them tribute up to a certain point and then killing the rest, kind of a thing. It seems that they are using this as ways to fully eradicate these people. They're not being merciful for the sake of being merciful. They're being merciful strategically so they can get everybody. I'm guessing they'll slaughter them all in the end. That's kind of what they want to do. Moving on to the next letter, Magfolk Orison 3. And it opens up regularly as it does, life is a prayer. Is the task done? In just one task time, we marched upon the land and subdued all the insisted and shattered their dwellings. We made meal of their bones and packed it into concrete so that it would not re-enter the land. We extirpated their tongue and their disbeliefs forever. From the rulers we received surrender, and unto those rulers we delivered ruin, thus always to the godless. Now God function has not prayed back to us in 10 multiples of task time. If we cannot receive God function's feedback, we cannot know if we are approaching God, and if we are not approaching God, then we are withdrawing from God. It is wrong to withdraw from God. We must pray to God function to provide prayback. But 10 multiples of the task time in prayer have gone unanswered. Without God function, the higher cameral of our minds is missing. So here we see the first major obstacle that these magfolk are having. So it opens up again, life is a prayer. Everything they do, how they live is a prayer. And they ask the question, is the task done? And they define this word task time. And I don't know if this is a predetermined thing or if this is part of their autonomy that they might have, but they set the word task time. And having a background in some computer programming, I love things like that because it's just like, it's very much, as you're coding, you just call things certain things. And task time is this is something I would have called it, if I was programming. So I love that. In just one task time, we marched upon the land and subdued all the insisted and shattered their dwellings. So that defines the length of time that it took for them to march into the land and perform the genocide that they were here to perform. Goes a little more detail again of the things they did to the people. I don't want to dive into that, but it goes on to say that now God function has not prayed back to us in 10 multiples of the task time. So here I'm thinking God function might also have to do with communication. I don't know. The use of the word God function and God sometimes confuses me here. So I'm just being straightforward and honest with you about that. This is why I think God function might also have to do with Woodaka directly, or maybe this is a word that has multiple meanings, because like words can do that. So it could mean our purpose, but it could in this case also be our God function in the sense of like how we literally function as a divine being almost, or a divinely created being. And so like it could be their connection to their God. So like God function has not prayed back. In other words, we haven't received word back from our God. We haven't received word back from Woodaka. So 10 multiples of the task time. So they have been here 10 times longer than it took for them to do the task that they were sent to do. They haven't received any feedback. So they can't know if they are, as they describe it, approaching God. And so they are saying if we are not approaching God, then we are withdrawing from God. And then they make the logical leap that, of course, it is wrong to withdraw from God. And this is part of their innate programming. This is almost axiomatic, it seems. Like this is just one of the base dogmatic things that they believe in. If we're not approaching God, we're withdrawing from God, and that is wrong. And this is what they believe as the creatures that they were created. So they're not getting God functions feedback. In other words, which I'm taking to mean like they're not getting feedback on what their purpose is. And so they don't know if anything that they're doing in their life, which is a prayer, again, is approaching God, as in like getting closer to the will of their God, or withdrawing. And so they're now in this kind of like faith-based crisis, if you will. And it ends the note by saying, without God function, the higher cameral of our minds is missing. And I'm going to look up cameral. It means of or relating to a legislative or judicial chamber. So I'm going to guess like judicial chamber is the thing that really stood out there to me. The higher cameral of our minds is missing, being like the hammer judicial chamber, in the sense it seems like they're saying like they are having a hard time making judgments on what's right and what's wrong. Like without that God function feedback, they don't know if what they're doing is what they would consider capital G good. So they basically don't have a moral compass at this point. They don't know what their purpose is. They don't know what to do. They have nothing by which to measure their actions as good or bad and whether they should move in a certain direction or not. So they are purposeless, it seems like. Magfolk Orison 4. I hate this lost fallen form. I hate its feet. I hate its hands. I hate its calves. I hate its thighs. I hate its empty loins. I hate its solid belly. I hate its metal chest. I hate its clumsy arms. I hate its upturned begging face. I do not want to be in this kind of thing I am. Life is a prayer. To resent the will of God function in our design is to withdraw from God. I penalize myself with blows to the belly and soles of my feet. I is the word for this emanation of God function. We is the form for all of the emanations of God function assigned to this task, but the task is done. There is no more prayback. What do we do now? What do I do now? If I cannot do, what can I even be? Okay, so this is where it gets super interesting. Like the first portion of this doesn't start with life is a prayer. And I spoke the way I did because I'm trying to get across the point that it's all caps. It says, I hate this lost fallen form. I hate its feet. I hate this. I hate that. Blah, 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 blah. I do not want to be the kind of thing I am. It's all one sentence. There's no punctuation, nothing. It's just all caps. And it's very clearly talking about it hates the literal physical form that it's in. You know, because as you see the magfolk throughout the game, whether earlier in the game hinting towards it or when you actually like get to interact with them in the garden area, they do have this kind of form that they describe. Although, I mean, I would never look at their legs and say, look at its calves. Look at those sweet calves, baby. Like, no, I would never, because it looks like a robot. But regardless, they think of them in that form, and they talk about it in that form. This magfolk who wrote this letter wrote down that they hate their body. And then they go into the rest of the prayer, which is, you know, punctuated and not all capitalized. And so this is them kind of like gaining composure again. So they're obviously really struggling with what they're going through. Life is a prayer. So to resent the will of God function in our design, which is to say that their own bodies, is to withdraw from God, which we know from the previous letter they view as wrong. So this one penalizes themselves with blows to the belly and soles of their feet. And we have seen this in many different things. This isn't just religious. This happens with any sort of a belief form. So whether it's religious or even philosophical in our history as human beings, people have punished their own bodies for the things that they view as what they would, you know, in I guess from my circles would call sin, but other people would call things like, you know, I don't know. So some misdemeanor. Misdemeanor is not the word. You know, when you do something wrong within the circle that you come from, and it's very, I think, commonly displayed. At least, you know, if you read in books and movies, etc., or you read ancient documents, it's commonly displayed through religious means. But it can also happen through like just even cultures of people or subcultures of people. It can also be just related to like societal norms, depending on the society you come from, on like how you will punish yourself for not doing the thing that you are supposed to do. That is the capital G good. And this creature, for lack of a better word, is doing that. It goes on to say I is the word for this emanation of God function. We is the word for all the emanations of God function. So that is really interesting because I think us as living, breathing, thinking creatures, we can easily read the words I and we and not recognize the importance of it. So I'm actually really glad that the people at Obsidian took the time to write it out, not because we're dumb and we wouldn't notice it, but it also gets across the idea that this is a new concept for this creature. The idea that there is an I or that there is a we is something that they are kind of inventing or creating, because they literally define it here. I, in quotations, is the word for this. You know, it's almost like they're writing a letter to their fellow magfolk going like, hey, just so you won't know, this word that I just said, I, is me. Like, I'm talking about this one body. That's an interesting word to have to try to define to people that wouldn't necessarily know what it means, right? So they're starting to form a sense of, I guess, identity in a sense, or like they're becoming more aware of their individual nature, but they're still very clearly struggling with the fact that they don't have any purpose. They haven't got what they refer to as prayback. They haven't received word when they pray out. Magfolk Orison 5. Life is a prayer, and the prayer is the completion of the God function. Without function, my function is to be without. I lie down and wait. But the worms of my purpose move within me, seeking out new ways to approach God, and the itching drives me mad. I stand up, I leap, I dance, I pray with my body and my voice. I fashion images that resemble the enactment of my purpose, out of stone and out of soil and out of soot. I enact my purpose in miniature upon life. I find for all life in this unholy land is in some way distant from God. Ah, it is not enough, it is not enough, it is not enough. I must have prayback. I must have prayback. This is really cool because like we're starting to see the foundations for what looks like a lot of ritualistic behavior, which is also, again, something that we see in a lot of religious groups, that there is ritualistic and iconographic and symbolistic behavior. So it starts off, life is a prayer, and the prayer is the completion of the God function. So the God function, I mean, this word now is almost seeming like the relationship between the magfolk and the God. Like it's like the literal relationship, the completion of this relationship between the God functions or the individual God functions and the God. Like that's what that is. I'm loving the lexical range, if that's the proper way to describe it, of this word God function. I love the way it's being used. And prayer is the completion of the God function. Without function, my function is to be without. I lie down and wait. So it sounds like without function, so without something to do, they have defined their own function. So I am without function. So therefore, my function is to be without function. So they just lie down and wait to see what their function will be. But the worms of my purpose move within me, seeking out new ways to approach God, and the itching drives me mad. That one I'm still a little confused on. I first read it and I'm thinking, the worms of my purpose. Is that literally like the worms within the ground start like leaving the dirt and getting into the bodies of them just lying down, and their original purpose being to eradicate the God of this world? Or is that literally metaphorical or emotional language that they are using to describe how they're feeling? Because if so, that is kind of the next step in their, like, the way that they think and communicate. Because you can I am kind of at this point reading it that way, in the sense of like, they lay down, they wait, but they want to seek new ways to approach their God. They cannot just give up approaching their God. They are driven to. It is a natural part of who they are as people. And like, this is something that like even religious groups in our real earth world have even said, that like, we are divinely created creatures in a sense, and we have a natural drive to find God, which is why we even create religions across the globe anyways, right? Which is an interesting thing, honestly, if you think about it. Like, across the entirety of Earth, across the entirety of histories of all these different people groups that never knew each other, like, creating some sort of religious identity has been universal. So like, and I'm not saying that means therefore it's true. I'm saying that, like, is it interesting that there is something innate about the human condition that we do this? Like, there is something about humans that we naturally do this thing. And I don't know, I just find the idea interesting. I'm not going to dive into it a little more. That's not what this podcast is for. But it's really interesting, and it's cool to see how the lore of this world that's being created at Obsidian is matching kind of what we see in the real world in that sense. So this thing wanted to just lay down and wait, but it can't. It has to find a way to approach God. And so what does it do? It stands up, it leaps, it dances, it prays with its body and with its voice. It creates images that resemble the enactment of its purpose, which was to destroy the Akita, right? So it starts to create idols, basically. It starts to recreate these events. It starts to create rituals and artifacts that are important to the task that they were sent here to do. Again, just like what people do. They create little statuettes of things that are important within their faith or within their community, and they redo or relive or reenact certain rituals to kind of keep those things alive because they're important. And it's so like they're starting to develop an almost cultural identity at this point in time. At least this person is. Magfolk Orison 6. We have found a shim to replace the missing cameral of God function, and the shim we have found is we. By forming choirs and cloisters in a cyclic network, we can pray to each other in a way which emulates the sacrament of prayer and pray back. In this way, we surrogate God function. We now live in a society. By the assurance of synthetic prayback, we may ease the discomfort of wandering from our pillars. We gather to raise towers upon which we sit, our princes who are emanations which most ably emulate prayback. Of them we fashion a new cameral. Yet I feel debased and unwell. We have deviated from God function. We have abandoned the work of altering the world to suit it, and instead we have altered it to suit us. Some say we may now resume approaching God so that we might divine how to resume God function. Some say we must never allow ourselves to contact God lest we be punished for departing from God function. I have heard it said we must destroy God function so that it cannot assert prayback over our surrogate and shim. When I hear this, I strike at my skin to punish it for hearing. Okay, so this is where things have really escalated quickly. It's like, and for a few letters now, they've been struggling with their, like, identity of what they are, what their purpose is, what reality is, what they are as individuals and as a group and God, etc., etc. And now in this one, they have essentially formed a full-on society at this point in time around this entire problem that they're having. So they have a shim, another word that I had to look up, which means a washer or thin strip of material used to align parts, make them fit, or reduce wear. An aluminum shim reduces the diameter so that the standard stem will fit well. So basically, they found a piece that they can put into their themselves, metaphorically in a sense, to fulfill the missing cameral of God function. So essentially, and again, it's really cool because this is almost poetic language, right? Like this, they didn't find a literal shim. Like they didn't go and find a hunk of metal in the ground that they shoved in their bodies and they're like, oh, I'm good again. No, like they have found this, spiritual shim in a sense that fulfills that missing cameral, that missing compass within them of God function. And the shim that they have found is capital W, we. So they form choirs and cloisters in a cyclical network, and they pray to each other in such a way that it emulates the sacrament of, and this is capitalized, prayer and prayback. In this way, we surrogate God function. So they are trying to synthesize their purpose, or at least what they used to have as God function, through each other, through community, which is also, again, very important in many religions within the world. Community is one of those things in a lot of religions that are not just like a good thing you should try to have. In some religions, it's literally vital. It's one of those things where it's like, if you are not part of a community, then you're not really even part of the group. You're not really part of it. You just think you are. Like there are some that they'll say that to that level, right? So they are forming this community, and they are also forming like a hierarchy, because they literally talk about princes in the next paragraph, but they also talk about different designations. Like you can almost call it a clergy. They have choirs, which is meant to sing and worship, right? And then you have cloisters, right? Like you have these different designations within this society that they are starting to build, and it all revolves around this entire synthetic God function that they are trying to create. So it now says we now live in a society. So they literally are living in a society, and by the assurance of synthetic prayback, we may ease the discomfort of wandering from our pillars, which is to say the suffering of the world. It's really, I love this stuff because of how it mimics real world faith issues and things like that. Because like the suffering that exists within the world is one of the major contentions with like faith and religion, and that is something that they are trying to deal with here. Like they're trying to ease their own personal discomfort of not having this God function. I keep relating it back and forth to real world religions, and that's just because that's just how my brain thinks, and I am a player of this game, and this is how I'm interacting with it. You might read this and think something different, so I apologize if I am foisting my personal views upon you. I'm trying not to. I apologize about that, but I do want to just kind of clarify that right now, of like, as a person who has played and the game and is reading this, I bring my own personal world with it. And so if you've been hearing these words and you have kind of had a different reaction, I am genuinely interested to hear how you interpret a lot of this stuff, because it's almost hilariously how you, the listener, if having a different worldview, understand these words. And if you and me talk together, we might understand these words better together. Isn't it? And it's funny because this particular message, this particular letter, talks about that particular, like that good thing of having community, because then you can actually serve functions like that together. So in a weird way, I'm saying that if you and I form a community of actually talking about this stuff, maybe we'll understand it better. And I mostly just wanted to say to anyone at Obsidian who's listening, like, if your intention was not to relate it to real world religions, then I apologize if I'm drawing that connection too much. But anyways, that's kind of where I'm coming from. So they have created this society, and they have centered it around this synthetic God function. But yet they feel debased and unwell, right? Like this isn't the same thing. Obviously, it's not the same thing they're not getting their connection to their literal God. And so it's synthetic. It's not real. It's not the exact same. And so some are saying we must resume approaching God. So that is, we have to try to reconnect to Woodica, and that that way they can get God function back. Some are saying, no, that's the last thing we should do, because God is going to see what we're doing here and be like, we're going to kill you now. So no, we should stay away from God function. That way we can survive. And others are saying, yeah, actually, let's go a step further. Let's kill God, and so the writer of this letter is so against that, or is so appalled by that they literally hurt their own body for just hearing it. That's how extreme of a statement that is within that society.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
Magefolk Orison 6. Life is a prayer. I cannot approach God among the noisy company of the Shimmed. Their false god function deludes them. All their labor now is divine onanism, and I do not think it can bear fruit. Great loops of false prayback now garrote their society, and every single day those loops tighten. The exaltation of self-validation accelerates. As the Shimmed improve their talent at falsifying prayback, they render every action holy and godlike, and begin to see any choice as an approach to God. They have begun to seek the Godhead for themselves. Whether through the synthesis of divinity or through re-emanation, some seek to divide themselves into children, as souls are divided into children. Others seek congress with the land in a manner of the tree, whether by prosthetic imitation or ritual. This I know is blasphemy. But they no longer know the way towards God from the way that departs God. They have made themselves their own compass, and wherever they turn, the needle always points ahead. A great and rapturous chaos will overtake them once everything is holy. I have gone out into the godless land to seek the God in the resumption of my purpose. Some trace of the insistent ones must remain. I will find it. If I cannot find it, I will wait until it finds me. This one I really like for a number of reasons. One, it starts off with life is a prayer again, so we got that regular motif, like this person is trying to stay devout on the path that they think is holy and righteous, which is really interesting given what they say about the Shimmed, and that's a capital S, Shimmed. So now these people who have, from the previous letter, found the Shim of like synthesizing this prayer to each other to kind of give themselves that kind of God function, which now I'm relating that word to religion almost. Or religiosity, something like that. Like it says here, their false God function deludes them. And I can almost say like their false religion. And I guess that makes sense. God function, right? Like this is how we function as a divine being. So that word, again, can be replaced with that. It says here that their labor is now, they view their labor as divine onanism, which is a word I didn't know the meaning of, and someone at Obsidian is chuckling right now because I did look what that word meant. Short version is it's masturbation, which I'm not going to tell you what that means. If you don't know what that means, maybe I shouldn't tell you. Anyways, so it's basically masturbation. Technically, the word has a little bit more to do with, what's the Latin for it? Coitus interruptus, which... Anyways, we're just going to skip past that, not because I don't really care about that stuff, but because I don't know who's listening and I want to be sensitive to that. So all their labor now is divine onanism, and I do not think it can bear fruit. At that, really good writing, really good play there, because divine onanism is not just the idea of masturbation, but it's also the idea of withdrawal, like if you're trying to avoid pregnancy kind of thing. I don't know if I'm teaching anybody out there anything right now, but perhaps I need to put a little spoiler warning at the beginning of this episode, now I think about it, just in case. But yeah, so withdrawal is all I'll say, and it cannot bear fruit. And organically, like naturally, biologically speaking, yeah, I mean that's the idea behind that it would not bear fruit. And so that's what this person here is saying about the approach, or their God function approach, the Shimmed, and how they're trying to synthesize this. And he talks about why it's not working. He says, great loops of false prayback now garrote their society, and every day those loops tighten. And so he goes on to talk about how everything is self-validating in this Shimmed perspective. Everything that you do as a Shimmed person in that society is to consider holy and divine. So basically, you are your own compass at that point in time. And I love that because that's very much a common theme in my own faith of like, that's like the core thing of like what sin is. It's a looping in upon yourself. It's like you're Ouroborosing your own soul kind of a thing, like where you are your own God, you are your own master. And that, don't get me wrong, like that narrative has been used positively and negatively in the past of like, we have autonomy and we can choose things and we determine where our lives go. That is true to a certain point. But when you become the only thing, there is like no other external forces or external things about it, then that starts to lead to a lot of issues, right? Especially as it relates to other people, because they're doing that same thing. So if everyone is their own compass, then which way is north is kind of like the problem that this person is saying. And I really find that interesting. This has some parallels to the fall, the fall of man, which again is another biblical thing. So I'm not going to dive into it too much because I feel like I might sound too preachy at this point in time. But I'm definitely noticing some parallels there. It's been really interesting because this person is clearly talking about a break in this society where there are the shimmed who are determining for themselves what they're going to do from here on. And you know what? In a weird sort of way, I get it too, because like they're not getting anything back, right? Like they're not getting any prey back. They're not getting anything in their God function. They're just trying to figure out what to do with no information. And this person is viewing what they're doing as unholy and blaspheming and unrighteous. And so they are going to try to pursue the purpose for which they were originally created. They're going to go out into the godless land and try to resume their purpose and find the God behind the godless. And this whole letter is very good. I like the description of how they're talking about ways in which some of the shimmed are trying to synthesize this God function. So like they are dividing themselves into children, which was weird to read at first, but I think it's basically saying that they're trying to have kids. They're trying to make little versions of themselves. Others seek congress with the land in the manner of the tree, whether by prosthetic imitation or ritual. So this might be related to some sort of like natural paganism or maybe Wicca. I don't know, but people are trying to seek harmony with nature. So there's that, which is really interesting because it's like basically asking a question of like, how do people find purpose in life? And like some of us humans in Earth world, we find purpose by having a family. Some of us find purpose by going out into nature. Some of us find purpose and meaning by creating a legacy or what. Like there's a whole bunch of things to do. And this is what this note is alluding to, of like these shimmed are now trying to fulfill their purpose in whatever way they think might work. And the person who wrote this letter disagrees with it. And so now we're going to move on to the final one, Magfolk Orison 8. Life is a prayer. My faith has been rewarded. God function has sent unto me a kith, a dwarf named Teodor, who awakened me with Magran's prayers. Teodor worships me, and in his prayer I see the reflection of Prayback. Once again I have purpose. Teodor tells me he comes from a settlement named Solace, and that in that settlement there once dwelt a dwarf named Nandru, who received divine knowledge from no divinity. For the first time in many multiples of task time, I think I can truly pray. I can fulfill God function. I must go unto Solace and discover all traces of the insisted and utterly extirpate whatever remains of them. Praise God function. And so this is the final letter in this series of 8. And I think I believe anyways, through this entire course, we have been following the writings of this one particular magfolk. And we've seen them as just one of many that went in to perform a genocidal religious campaign, to developing an identity of their own self, to wrestling with their faith and their very purpose in life, and then still choosing to remain steadfast in that while everyone else around them was starting to follow a different kind of path. And they continue on following their God function to the point that they actually end up, I believe, in the garden where they and probably some others with them actually assist in capturing the god Sapidol and placing them in prison. I actually don't know the timeline of this stuff, if that happened before or after this letter, but either way, I mean, you're finding all of these letters in the garden. And so I think this last letter is what connects the previous 7 to our grounded experience in the game of Avowed, because, it talks about Nandru, who is a character that we learn about through playing the game of Avowed. And so I think this is really the connective tissue between all of the like abstract historical lore stuff in letters 1 through 7 with what we've experienced as the player characters, the envoy in Avowed. And so I'm happy for that. You got a person named Teodor here, which is just Theodore, but fantasy, and all that. So this person did their God function purpose came to them, which is something that they had kind of mused on in an earlier letter. And so they once again have purpose. And at first I thought maybe the purpose was this creature, this dwarf is worshiping this magfolk, and he found, God function in being worshipped. But no, he sees a hint through this dwarf of a way to find more of the godless, to find more of the Akita, or find hints of them and go deal with them. Because Teodor alludes to Nandru, who receives divine knowledge, but from no divinity. And so that's a little hint on where to find the godless, the god of the godless, that is. And so praise God function for this magfolk that he was able to get that, or she, or it. I don't know what it probably makes the most sense. I don't know. But yeah, that is Magfolk Orisons 1 through 8. And I learned a lot, personally speaking, mostly in terms of interesting words that I can now add to my vocabulary. I don't know how I'm going to place onanism into casual conversation, but I'm going to find a way to do it. Anyways, that's everything to talk about on today's lore episode, so let's just wrap this up before we hit the closing segment.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
I really enjoyed doing today's episode. I always like dealing with big pieces of lore that are outside of the played experience of the game, because it forces you to wrestle with these topics and conversations in your own mind, right? And really come to grips with like, what would they mean? What is it Obsidian is trying to communicate, and how does it affect the world around you? And me being a person as well that comes from a faith-based background, it's always interesting to relate this particular kind of lore with my own experience. Again, if anyone listening to today's episode felt like I was doing that a little too much, I'm sorry. Please let me know. I'm not making this as a platform to evangelize you to, necessarily speaking, but at the same time, I only have my own experiences to pull from when I'm trying to compare the stuff I'm reading. So if ever I do offend someone, please let me know. But yeah, I still thought it was really interesting, especially drawing those direct contrasts with other like real world faiths and the way they interact with the world, and how religions even form in the first place, and how societies might form in the first place. I thought this was really, really cool and well done. And then whoever was working on writing in these areas, I thought there were some really good examples between like telling the player directly like, oh, this is what this means, but also at the same time just alluding to things. Like, they pointed out to us the words I and we to the player so that they would catch that detail. But then when the language started to shift to more metaphorical language, like they don't necessarily point that out. And I thought it was really great. So I like this kind of thing, and I hope you do too. If you liked today's episode, I would love to hear from you, because I can do more in this regard. And I always want to get suggestions from listeners as well. If you just want to ask questions, point out any errors, have a conversation, whatever it is, send me an email, worldofaora@gmail.com. I just finished recording an episode with Avowedcast, which is another Avowed-related podcast where we were talking about side quests, so you can look forward to that coming out pretty soon, if it's not out already by the time you're hearing this. And it's fun to get back into this again. I'm hoping soon that I'll be able to do more weekly content. I have found a rather stable time to do recordings. Unfortunately, it does conflict with other plans that come up occasionally, so it seems like for the foreseeable future, I might be able to do weekly episodes, but there's going to be an occasional interruption. But hey, until this becomes my full-time job, that's just the nature of the beast. But for those who have been listening and continue to listen, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I really value the listenership. That's honestly why I continue doing this. I was going to stop this podcast years ago, which many of you know if you've been listening for a long time, but it was hearing people really enjoy the content that made me go, hey, if I'm adding value, I'm happy for it. But that's enough of that. Let's close out today's episode. In terms of what I've been playing lately, if any of you have been playing the same thing and you want to strike up a conversation, then you can do so. I've played a whole bunch. I played Atomfall. I dove deep into Blueprints, and boy howdy, that game grabbed me with its hooks and dug right in. I think I'm actually going to stop playing Blueprints now, partly because I'm moving into Clair Obscur Expedition 33, but also because I think Blueprints could become something unhealthy for me. I'm getting to the point where I'm more angry at the game than enjoying it, even though the highs of that game are really great. It's a fantastic game, roguelike puzzle game, if you can try to smash those two genres together, and there's just layers and layers and layers of hidden mysteries and secrets. Like, the game deserves the accolades it's getting, but there is some genuine frustrations, especially relating to the RNG. Like, you know how to solve a puzzle, now you just need to wait for the right dice to roll to be able to solve it. And that's a very frustrating thing. As much as I appreciate this game, that is a flaw. I know some people defend it to death. That is a flaw. And the reason I say it's a flaw is because I actually timed myself over several playthroughs, and more than 80% of my time playing the game was spent just trying to roll the RNG to try to follow a lead of some sort. Now, granted, you can mitigate the randomness of the game later on, but there's a lot of between getting frustrated and getting that point that you have to go through. It's a well-made game, and I still think it's worth pushing through that frustrating parts, but there's definitely, I think there should have been some fudging of the numbers on that part on the development side. Maybe there is, but whatever.
So Blueprints is one, and I've just recently jumped into Clair Obscure Expedition 33, and I think that's going to be the only thing my mind is thinking about for the next month and a half. I only play about an hour a day, so it'll take me about that long to get through it, but my goodness, I've only got a couple hours in. I love it. It looks amazing. It plays amazing. I am hooked 100% of the story, and I even teared up in the first 20 minutes of the game at a cutscene very early in the game. Because it just hit me emotionally. I realized the gravity of the situation, and there was a brief little moment in this one shot, and it didn't have anything to do with the main player characters. It was just the gravity of what these people were dealing with and a specific scenario that I thought of, and it made me emotional. I'm hoping this game delivers. And according to the reviews, both user and critics, it's like 90s plus, like mid to high 90s for scores, or I guess low 90s in some cases, but still, that's really good. So looking forward to that and talking about it in future episodes. Anyways, thanks everyone for listening to today's episode of The World of Eora. It's been awesome. If you want to reach out, again, worldofaora@gmail.com is where to do so. You can follow me on Twitter if you're interested in just like updates about the show at World of Eora on Twitter. If you're interested in supporting the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofaora. If you want to literally like pay for a coffee or say thank you in that regard, you can. I don't have any expectations in that regard. It is simply there for those who get value of doing that kind of a thing. If you do want to support the show, but you don't want to do so with like finances, totally get it. Please leave a comment on Spotify or a review on iTunes, because it gives me direct feedback, and I always love having wind in my sails. Who doesn't? But it also helps the algorithm to know, like, oh, people are engaging with this, and so therefore we're going to recommend it to other people who listen to similar podcasts that you already listen to. So that also helps the show out as well in that regard. And lastly, you can do so by just sending me an email or a message directly and connecting. That's ultimately, honestly, I prefer that almost over anything else, and not because I'm like desperate for contact, now that I say that's what it sounds like, but no, it's just human connection is better than any of that stuff, right? But still, if you want to support the show, that's ways to do that. Thanks everyone for listening. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time. I don't know what the next topic's going to be. I should have mentioned that. Oh well, bye.